Welcome everybody to this week's Dissecting Design. For our episode this time, I figure we're going to do something a little bit different. Over the week I had a chance to play through Mother Russia Bleeds, which is a very brutal and a modern take on the beat-em-up genre. And for today, what I would like to do is talk about the genre a little bit more in depth and what makes it work and doesn't work. And we're going to use the game Streets of Rage 2 as an example. The Streets of Rage series, of course, from Sega, was a very popular one during the heyday of the, I believe it was late 80s, early 90s that the series was popular. And that was also the time when the beat-em-up was also incredibly huge. Not only on consoles with games like, oh my goodness, stuff like, even we could talk about like Bayou Billy, Final Fight, Double Dragon, and of course in the arcades with many, and I do mean many examples. But the beat-em-up genre was essentially the precursor of what we would call, or what would become the action genre, with games like Ninja Gaiden, Bayonetta, God of War, and the like. And similar to the platformer, I think it's a genre that a lot of people underestimate in terms of making a good one. With the platformer and the beat-em-up genres being so old, they've become very much an institution of game development. And I know plenty of indie developers and first-time designers who will go to these genres to kind of test the waters and see what they can do with it. But with that said, there's a lot that goes into making these older genres work. And we're going to talk about how Streets of Rage 2 did it right, as well as some of the limitations of the genre that would eventually lead to its decline and kind of the rise of the action genre. But with that said, I'm going to load up our little emulator here, and we'll get going with Streets of Rage 2 next. Alright, welcome back. So, this is Streets of Rage 2. Now, when it comes to the beat-em-up genre, one of the most important parts is having different characters, and they're usually rated, or their abilities are rated in very specific categories, and each game will usually have their own unique measurements. When we play this on stream, I went with Max, who was the very popular one, just to make sure we're recording. I'm going to go with Blaze here for the average play. Now, the beat-em-up genre, in terms of its design, hasn't really, or never really changed all that much. You're usually beset by all manner of thugs in a city where apparently law enforcement doesn't exist. Oop, how dare you hit me. Now, older examples, or lesser-known examples of the beat-em-up genre, gives you a very basic moveset, just basically mashing the same button for 30 minutes to an hour of play. One of the things that Streets of Rage did, or Streets of Rage 2 did, was give you different moves. So let me see if I can get this to work here. There you go. So you have this back attack. You have your normal punch. You have a charge attack. Get over here, you random guy. Come on. There we go. This is your special move, which causes you health, and we'll talk about why that is in a later section. But one thing that was kind of innovative for the time was being able to attack enemies behind you, like so. There's also this basically forward dash attack that does a lot of damage. If you plan just right, you hit the enemies multiple times. Here's another favorite. Just smash them like so. And having all these different attacks, again, was very different for the era. I wonder if I can throw that at him. Oop, wrong move. There we go, I threw, but there was no one there. Now, this kind of format as well became standard for the beat-em-up genre, I think even to this day with indie games, allowing players to move at different elevations of the plane. Oh, that hurt. And different examples of the genre will allow you to play with different numbers of players. Now, one thing that's very important to a good beat-em-up is the sound effects. And while I have the sound muted or lowered for this dissection, you can hear barely when I smack him with the pipe. Right there. Get off me. Now, balancing the number of enemies on screen is very important, because how limited your moveset is means that you really can't respond to too many enemies. So many games will introduce different enemy types that mix things up, and you'll see one right here. Our little friend, Jack. Ooh. Who can be very annoying to fight when you're just using your hands. Some enemies will have invincibility frames where you can't hit them while they're charging up or making use of a specific move. You also notice the first use of having multiple health bars. This was a way of giving enemies even more damage while keeping to the same UI scheme. And it can be very annoying fighting enemies like this, and we'll go into more detail about the limitations again in a later part. I'll move into the next area of this level. Notice that we have different environments, and again, you'll have different enemies start to show up. One thing that's also very important is being able to stun lock enemies. Oh no. As long as they're all facing you like so, you can just keep hitting, 4, 5, 6 different guys. And being able to manage crowds like this is very important. Now, depending upon the beat 'em up in question, they may balance games with multiplayer to either have more enemies on screen or increase their health. But typically you want enemies to have enough health that they matter, but not so much that you're spending like 20-30 seconds on a single enemy, unless we're talking about bosses. Get out of there, you. Now we're going to be coming to a boss fight in the next probably 30 seconds, and we'll talk about how bosses really try to flip the script on players when it came to the beat 'em up genre. But first, let me finish these guys off. No matter how they try to diversify your attacks, some enemies always become a slog to fight. But once we're done with Electro over here, we will get to the fight. Also, due to their simplicity, it's very easy to break beat 'em ups. If you ever watch someone do a speed run, they will usually repeat the same moves over and over again. But it's time for our fight. Bosses in beat 'em ups have their AI basically over-tuned. They can block your attacks, they can even counter you, as you just saw right there. Some games will even throw more minor enemies in to try and mess with you. I just did a counter, I'm not sure how I did that. I'll try and exploit the enemy here. But later enemies have their timing even tuned higher, making it all but impossible to get in a normal attack string. And anyone who's played a beat 'em up knows the strategy of just constantly jump kicking enemies. There's that famous music as well. But we're going to skip ahead just a little bit because this is an old game. I can't exactly fast forward. But we'll talk about how the beat 'em up genre's foundation was built on the arcade industry with metrics-driven design next. Alright, we're later on in stage 2 now. And this is when we started to introduce some of the more advanced enemies, including this Kung Fu guy. As you can see, once you start getting hit by an enemy, it can become very hard to get out of the combo. Once this guy is down, of course, we're on to finish off his friends. And this is also a good example of when they start throwing in multiple enemies at you. Typically you want to try and control the room, but it's very easy to take a lot of damage in a game like this. Another major part of beat 'em up design is the fact that you really don't have defensive options. I can of course adjust my elevation or where I am depth-wise on screen, but that's about it. We're not going to have the ability to block or do counter moves in a lot of the older beat 'em ups. Now here comes another famous part, as we're going to be knocking enemies off. Oh, there's a good example of getting beat up very easily. Take that. But here's, if we can do it right, we're going to be throwing enemies into the pit of death. And hopefully not let them happen to me. Take that. Ooh. Now, as we're going forward here, this is probably a good time to talk about metrics-driven game design. Metrics-driven game design, or metrics-driven gameplay, was built from the arcades as a way of controlling the experience. One of the ways the best or the most profitable arcades worked was by knowing when to basically get money from the player. And metrics-driven design was the part of that. The idea of balancing the difficulty curve around basically how far to play before it becomes hard enough that you're going to be forced to use a quarter. And when it comes to the beat-em-up genre, that's with bosses. Due to how their AI can be overtuned, or their difficulty, it was very easy to make a boss that could cost you many lives, or in many cases quarters as well. And of course, the difficulty of the beat-em-up genre escalate as you got further in, with sometimes having bosses repeating themselves for added trouble. Now this guy can only be attacked in a specific way. While he's up in the air like that, you can't hurt him. He can also grab you for increased damage. Ooh. So I'm going to try and finish him off here. And even the experts of these games, or speedrunners, they will still lose lives to many fights. They're just not designed otherwise. Get away from me, buddy. Got him. For other beat-em-up genres, when it came to metrics-driven design, this is why your special move costs you health. Because this was a way of basically weakening you so that you would be easier to be killed, and otherwise easier to spend money. And as with normal games, the progression curve or the difficulty curve does increase over levels, but you will always find bosses to be tweaking that even higher. Get away from me, buddy. Right there, I just lost some health. And as you can see, for those of you who are fans of action games or beat-em-ups, the foundation really didn't change all that much. But with that said, I could sit here and play through the game for the next 20-30 minutes, but I'm going to hopefully use one of my saves that I have, and we'll talk about one of the later levels and just how much harder things get, especially when it comes to enemy designs next. Alright, welcome back. We're a little bit further into the game now. I believe this is stage, I want to say 4 or 5. And the boss of this stage is a really good example of that kind of metrics-driven design and that over-tuning that we saw of bosses. And we'll get there probably in the next few minutes. But while we're going through it, you can start to see some of the new enemies showing up. We can talk about some of the issues that are indicative of the beat-em-up genre. They are very repetitive. As you can see, we are stage 5 in, and as you notice, a lot of the enemies are still the same. They'll have more health or they'll do more damage, but that is about it. You're not going to find any real progression models or progression curves in terms of new moves or abilities. And this is probably one of the big reasons that the genre kind of saw its decline in favor of action games, especially with the ability for the player to grow and new situations came up. I mean, look how long it's taking to kill this guy. There we go. And while the environments are differing, it's very hard in terms of balance to get how hard the game should be. I've played examples of the beat-em-up genre. I looked at one earlier this year that the game would just literally spawn like half a dozen enemies, and that was like one screen's worth of fights. And you have to be careful because, again, the player is limited in terms of what they're able to do. we don't have advanced moves to get around multiple enemies or counter them as well. Ooh, and you can see here I am taking a lot of damage. Let's see if we can make it to the top deck here. There we go. Oh, wait, there's still one more guy we need to deal with. Come on, you. Also notice I don't have the ability to run either. This is something that only a few beat-em-ups had. But the problem with this design is that making the enemies have more health or attack faster, it's making the game more challenging, but it's not making things more interesting. It's just increasing the amount of time we're spending. Oh, and there's a good case of me being stun-locked. Oh, and speak of the devil, we have a boss fight now relegated to a minion. Oh, jeez. Yeah, I'm going to lose a life here. I can just feel it. And again, in some cases, you just get put into an unwinnable situation. Especially when all these guys are coming at you. There we go. Nope, get off me. And if you think this is bad, just wait until you see the boss of this level. Come on. Now, the third Streets of Rage, I think, got even harder with its boss designs and just the groups that they were throwing at you. Right. Oh. Well, I'm trying to exploit him as best as I can. But sometimes enemies will just, like, run up and just smack you, and there's nothing you can do about it. There we go. Now, this is the final part of the ship. But the boss here is just very annoying. Now, I know the original Streets of Rage was in the arcade. I don't remember if Streets of Rage 2 was in there as well. I'm pretty sure it was. Oh, and look, there's another boss that we fought that's now a regular enemy. Come on, buddy. Don't let the lack of boss music fool you, though. Alright, what are you doing? I'm going to try and deal with him as quickly as possible. I'm pretty sure boss rushes were invented just for the difficulty spikes as well. Alright, can I kill him without him finishing me off? Oh, and all of our friends are here as well. It's very important to introduce new enemies, because again, that's your only real way of changing or mixing things up. There's a ninja. Two ninjas for the price of one. Oh no. I forget if this game has friendly fire or not. Oh. Chances are I'm going to lose all my lives on this one stage. We'll see what happens. And again, that's the example of these difficulty spikes. You can have a very easy time starting out, and then when they hit, you can just lose all your lives and basically get forced to spend quarters. Again, that was not by accident or poor design. They were explicitly built like that to get it just right so that you become invested in it. Oh, and now the boss. And for an example of just how crazy the AI can get, not this guy, of course. But he is coming. There he is. So I can deal with them. Knows how fast he was able to start his attack pattern. You pretty much have to exploit the AI in any way you can, and even then, it may not be enough. Come on. Don't just gotta use your special. Like right there, the instant attack upon recovery. And the fact that we have a heavy guy also for this boss. Alright. Oh no. Don't know how we counter that. Oh. There's also a fight with two like ninja twins that's super frustrating later on. But again, there's nothing I can really do differently due to limitations on my side. They can just overtune this fight, making it even more, or they can keep overtuning the bosses to increase their difficulty. Like right there, he hitting me out of my little special attack. Oh, and yes, he has a priority when it comes to grab sometimes. Like right there. Look how long it's taking. Again, how much damage I've taken in this one stage. Finally. Oh, so I was right. It was stage 5. And again, this kind of metrics-driven game design became indicative of early console games and pretty much the beat-em-up genre for the majority of its heyday. Even with console games that were built, or console or beat-em-ups built exclusively for the consoles, they still were metrics-driven. Oh my goodness. Notice how much health these enemies have now. But the variety does help. It's still frustrating though, especially if you play really well and then you just lose all your lives later on. And due to the limitations again on my side, it's not like I'm unlocking new moves or stuff like that. So can I actually deal with this? Sometimes you just have to use your health, as you saw right there. But of course, it's going to make it easier for you to get knocked down. But I think with that said, the game is also messing up. I think that's just due to the emulation of the port. With that said though, I'm going to load up Streets of Rage 3 and we'll get to my final thoughts on kind of the beat-em-up genre and how things evolve, because we're just going to be dancing around with this guy for the next few minutes, so see you all then. Alright, welcome back. We're going to wrap up our talk with Streets of Rage 3. Now, the reason I'm keeping it not full screen is that the emulation was causing some slowdown. Now, at the heyday, the beat-em-up genre was one of the most popular for the arcades, despite how formulaic it was. And like I said at the beginning, the simplicity of the genre really opened itself up for independent developers, much like the platformer. But with that said, there are some very interesting intricacies that you have to deal with in order to get this to work. Because there are bad examples of beat-em-ups, just as there are bad examples of platformers. It's really about being able to balance the player's abilities with the enemies that you're fighting. Ow. Get out of there, you. And some of the lesser examples would just throw so many enemies at the player that combat became more of a slog than it did interesting. Not sure why I fight gun guys now, but why not? And as you saw in the last part with the bosses, it's very easy to just overtune them, and then it becomes frustrating rather than interesting to fight. But even with that said, the best examples of the beat-em-ups, such as Streets of Rage and Double Dragon, never really evolved in terms of its gameplay. And as we saw near the end of the 90s, especially in the early 2000s, the beat-em-ups went away in favor of action games, when you could have more variety in terms of the progression model, and even just in terms of gameplay with puzzles and interesting situations. For those of you watching this, can you think of modern day examples of pretty good beat-em-up games? Either doing things their own way, or being an homage to games like Streets of Rage, Double Dragon, and the like. As an interesting example of metric-driven design, Double Dragon 3 in the arcade was, I believe, the first example of a game featuring microtransactions, with the ability to buy special moves and health upgrades using additional quarters. And that is definitely a case of things going way too far. Gotta deal with these guys. And I think, just to also reiterate on, having different moves and different characters is such an important part of good beat-em-ups. For instance, in Mother Russia Bleeds, every character essentially behaves the same way with the same kind of moves. But in this game, these characters react differently, some are faster, they have different specials and stuff like that. But I think with that said, we'll do one more final attack on this group of thugs, like so, and then let's say goodnight. So like I said, when it comes to the beat-em-up genre, this is a good test of a designer's skill. Because again, it's such a simple genre to design, but it's very easy to mess up. And as another question, what can you guys think of examples of independent developers doing the genre justice, or messing up as well? Our little boy here is certainly taking it to them. But that is a perfect screen cap, I think, to wrap this up on. But with that said, I like the beat-em-up genre. Again, I grew up playing action games, from X-Men to platformers, Mega Man, and the like. But I would also argue, I think for me, that I would find that the beat-em-up genre is a little bit hard to get back into. With one, I think, possible exception, with games built on the, there it is, the River City Ransom design, where you actually have RPG progression. And that in of itself, I think, could be worthy of a dissection in the future. Because that is probably the only case we really saw of the beat-em-up genre being elevated without adding in more microtransactions and requiring more money. Well, that said, thank you so much for watching this week's Dissecting Design. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back for daily discussions here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games, with new Dissecting Designs going up every Monday. But until next week's, have a great night, and we'll leave Skate here to his fate. So, until then, take care. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/gwbicer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.